When I think back to those earlier days of my life in the quiet outskirts of Portland, Oregon, it feels like remembering a dream that belonged to someone else, a softer, gentler woman who still believed the world would never turn cruel to her. I lived alone in the two-story house my late husband Daniel and I spent nearly 30 years building, repairing, saving for, and pouring our love into. The place wasn't fancy, but it was our cedar siding faded by Oregon rain, a front porch full of potted herbs, and a backyard garden where I planted lilies every spring because they reminded me of my mother. I was 68 then, my silver hair usually tied low behind my neck, my hands thin but steady from years of homemaking, sewing, and tending the soil. Mornings were always my favorite. I would brew a cup of chamomile tea, sit on the porch wrapped in a crocheted shawl, and listen to the sparrows chirping on the telephone wires. The neighborhood kids rode their bikes up and down the street before school, mail trucks rattled past, and nothing felt threatening or uncertain. Life was quiet, predictable, and warm, exactly the way I thought old age should be. And at the center of that warmth was my daughter, Cassidy Moore. She was 34 at the time, polished, confident, always moving fast like the whole world was running a race she refused to lose. With long curled brown hair, sharp cheekbones, and a laugh that once brightened any room, Cassidy worked in a bustling office downtown. She called often, sometimes just to ask if I'd eaten or if my blood pressure was behaving itself. She'd say, "Mom, when I'm settled, you won't have to worry about a thing. I'll take care of you, I promise." I believed her. I believed every word. Cassidy wasn't just my daughter, she was the last piece of my husband left in this world. After Daniel passed away from a heart attack when Cassidy was in college, I raised her alone, working part-time sewing jobs and picking up night shifts at the local bakery during peak seasons. Every penny I saved went toward her tuition, her textbooks, her future. When she graduated and said she wanted to give me the life I deserved, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. But time changes people, sometimes in ways you can't see until it's too late. It started subtly. Cassidy visited less, claiming work deadlines were piling up. When she did come by, she wore designer handbags I'd never seen before, perfumes that smelled expensive, shoes that looked like they belonged on magazine covers. And always came with Mason Reed. I should have trusted the ache in my stomach the first moment I saw him. Mason was the kind of handsome that feels practiced. Perfect hair, carefully trimmed stubble, a smile that never reached his eyes. He complimented the house, kissed Cassidy too dramatically in front of me, then called me ma'am in a way that sounded more mocking than respectful. He bragged about business opportunities, investments, big plans. It was all noise to Meshany and hollow. Cassidy acted different around him. More boastful, more dismissive of the simple life she grew up in. She teased me for keeping old furniture, for wearing cardigans I'd knitted myself. She started hinting just slightly that the house was too big for me and that I'd be better off letting someone younger take charge of things. Looking back now, it's obvious she had been softening me up. Then one rainy afternoon, one of those gray Oregon days where the sky feels heavy as wet wool, Cassidy sat across from me at the dining table. Mason lingered in the doorway pretending to scroll his phone. Cassidy reached across, touched my hands, and said in the sweetest voice she could summon, "Mom, Mason and I are planning to get married. And it would make things so much easier if you transferred the house and savings to my name. It's just for management, Mom. You're getting older. Let me handle everything so you won't need to stress." My heart squeezed. I didn't want to think of myself as old or fragile. But Cassidy looked at me like she truly cared, like she was trying to protect me from life's burdens. She promised I would never need to worry again. That she'd take me traveling. That she'd move me into a cozy senior community with nurses and activities and warm meals. "Please trust me, Mom," she whispered. "I am your daughter. I'd never hurt you." I remember the exact feeling that washed over me, guilt. Guilt for doubting her. Guilt for thinking I could maintain everything alone. Guilt because she was my only child, and I had always told myself raising a good human being was my life's work. So I signed. My trembling signature slid across the property transfer forms, the bank authorization papers, the legal documents Mason claimed were standard. They took everything: house title, land deed, retirement savings. When they left that afternoon, Cassidy kissed my cheek and told me she loved me. Mason winked as he closed the door. I tried convincing myself I'd done the right thing. That this was what mothers did, trust their children. But peace lasted only 14 days. On the 15th night, I sat sewing in the living room, mending a sweater for Cassidy because she once told me it made her feel like a kid again. The rain was coming down in steady sheets.
The house felt warm, Familiarmine.
Suddenly the front door opened, and Cassidy walked in with Mason behind her. I smiled, expecting a surprise visit. Instead, Cassidy's voice was cold. Flat. Like she'd rehearsed it.
Mom, you can stay here anymore.
Mason and I need space. You'll need to find somewhere else. Maybe a shelter or something temporary. You'll manage. The needle slipped from my fingers. I stared at her, unable to breathe. What are you saying, sweetheart?
My voice cracked like dry wood.
She crossed her arms.
This is my house now.
Legally. You signed it over. We're starting our life together, and we don't need disruptions. Mason added, it's better for everyone, Eleanor. I stepped forward, shaking.
Cassidy, I am your mother. This is my home.
You can't just. She turned away. I already packed some things for you. I remember actually begging, grabbing her sleeve like a frightened child. But she pulled away as if my touch disgusted her. Then she pushed me toward the door, her face blank, as though she were shoving out a stranger. The sound of the lock clicking behind me was the loudest, cruelest noise I've ever heard. Rain soaked through my clothes at once.
The streetlights flickered.
I clutched the old canvas bag she'd tossed out, a few shirts, a toothbrush, my wallet with barely enough cash for a cheap meal. I looked at the house, the home I had built, glowing warmly through the windows, now closed to me forever.
I whispered into the dark, why, Cassidy?
What did I do to deserve this?
No answer came. Only the hiss of the rain and the cold settling deep into my bones.
That was the night my life truly came undone. The night my daughter forced me out still lingers in my memory like a bruise that refuses to fade. After the door shut behind me, I walked without knowing where to go, just wandering through the slick, rain-soaked sidewalks of our sleepy Oregon suburb. My legs trembled, not only from the cold but from the shock of realizing I no longer had a place in the world I'd spent decades building. People passed by inside warm cars, their headlights sweeping briefly across my drenched figure before disappearing again into the distance. No one stopped. No one even slowed down. I told myself I was invisible, just another old woman who'd slipped through the cracks of life. When the rain turned heavier, I ducked beneath a bus shelter near the edge of the neighborhood. The metal bench was icy under my body, and I pulled my thin coat tightly against my chest. I kept replaying Cassidy's face in my mind, the indifference in her eyes, the way she wouldn't even look at me while pushing me out. I'd always imagined that if life ever brought me to my knees, at least my own child wouldn't be the one pushing me down. Hours crawled by.
My bones ached from the cold. My heart ached from something far worse.
By the time the sky faded from black to a washed-out gray, I felt like a person erased, like someone whose story had ended without dignity. My hands were stiff, my throat dry, and my stomach twisted painfully from hunger. I wondered if this was how homeless people felt their first night outside, terrified, ashamed, invisible. And I wondered how many of them had families that simply stopped caring. Just when I thought I wouldn't be able to stand much longer, I heard the squeaking sound of bicycle brakes. A young woman with short dark hair pulled up beside the shelter, her cheeks flushed from the morning chill. She wore a gray hoodie dotted with raindrops, and her eyes big brown, full of kindness locked onto mine before I even had time to look away. "Ma'am, are you okay?" she asked softly, stepping off her bike. That question, something so simple, felt like someone placing a warm hand on my frozen heart. No one had asked me that in months. Not sincerely, at least. I don't know," I whispered, embarrassed by how broken my voice sounded. She leaned in a little, not close enough to frighten me, but enough that I could see the sincerity in her face. "It's freezing out here. Did you spend the night outside?"
I nodded slowly. The truth felt too heavy to speak aloud.
The young woman bit her lip, looked at me again, and then spoke with gentle determination.
"My name is Harper.
Let me help you, please." I shook my head automatically. Pride is stubborn, even when you have nothing left.
"I don't want to trouble you.
I'm just an old woman who lost her way." Harper frowned, her brows knitting.
"You not trouble.
Please, you look like my mom would've looked if she were still alive." Her voice cracked slightly. I couldn't forgive myself if I walked away. Something inside me softened, something that had been hard and splintered since the night Cassidy changed. A stranger was offering me the compassion my own blood refused to give. Harper placed her bike against the shelter wall and extended a hand toward me.
"Come home with me. Just for now. You can warm up, eat something, talk to me if you want.
Or not. I won't ask questions unless you want to answer." Tentatively, I reached for her hand. Her palm was warm despite the cold. She helped me stand, supporting me with surprising strength, and guided me carefully along the wet sidewalk toward an older apartment building a few blocks away. Harper lived on the third floor, no elevator, just a narrow stairway decorated with potholed paint and scattered notices taped to the walls. She walked slowly so I could keep up. Her apartment was tiny but full of life. Plants lined the windowsills, books stacked in uneven piles, string lights wrapped around the ceiling corners. A little dog, a fluffy tan terrier mix, ran circles around her feet, wagging its tail like I was the most exciting visitor in the world. "That's Peanut," she said with a shy smile. "He's friendly, maybe too friendly." She ushered me inside, helped me sit on a small sofa covered in a soft knitted blanket, and quickly turned on the heater. Warm air began to fill the room, and I felt my fingers thawing painfully. "I'm going to make you some tea," Harper said.
"Peppermint okay?"
I nodded, trying not to cry at how natural her kindness felt, how effortless. It struck me that Cassidy hadn't made me a cup of tea in years. Harper moved around the kitchen with an ease I envied, boiling water, preparing toast, scrambling an egg, all while keeping an eye on me to make sure I didn't faint. Peanut hopped up beside me, laying his warm little body against my thigh as if he sensed I needed comfort. When Harper finally sat beside me with a steaming mug, she spoke gently. "You don't have to tell me what happened, but if you want to, I'll listen." Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the safety in her eyes. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't spoken honestly to anyone in months. But suddenly, the words came out. I told her everything, how my daughter had changed, how Mason manipulated her, how I'd signed my home away, how Cassidy had thrown me out like I was unwanted clutter. I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my husband's funeral.
My whole body shook with it.
Harper didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She didn't try to fix anything. She just held my hand. When I finished, she wiped my tears with the sleeve of her hoodie and whispered, "You didn't deserve that. None of it. And you're not going back out there. Not while I'm here." Her words, soft but certain, felt like a lighthouse appearing in the middle of a storm. I don't know how to repay you, I said, choking on my own gratitude. You don't need to repay me, she replied.
Just stay. Let me be here for you.
That was the moment right there in that cramped, plant-filled apartment when something shifted inside my chest. For months I'd believed I was worthless, a burden, disposable. But in Harper's eyes, I wasn't any of those things. In that tiny home with creaky floors and mismatched furniture, I felt safe for the first time in a long time. Safe and seen. And from that day forward, the loneliness that had nearly swallowed me began, slowly, to loosen its grip. Moving into Harper's apartment was never something I planned. I thought I'd stay only a night or two, just enough to stop shivering and gather myself before trying to figure out where a woman my age could possibly go. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and I slowly realized that what I'd found in Harper's home wasn't temporary refuge. It was a new beginning I never knew I needed. Harper lived with a kind of creative chaos that used to overwhelm me at first. Sketchbooks spread across the coffee table, half-finished digital tablet drawings on the counter, pencils tucked behind her ear, and sticky notes with inspirational quotes taped to the refrigerator. She was a freelance graphic designer, working for small companies and local cafes that needed logos or packaging designs. Her schedule was unpredictable: late nights, early mornings, last-minute client edits, but the energy in her home felt warm and alive, like sunlight constantly trying to sneak in through the blinds. I began helping around the apartment naturally, not out of obligation but out of instinct. I'd been a homemaker all my life. Creating comfort was the one thing I still felt confident doing. Every morning, I'd wake before Harper, slip quietly out of the fold-out guest bed she'd prepared for me, and make my way to the tiny kitchen. The first week, I only made myself a cup of tea. But the second week, I started making breakfast: soft scrambled eggs, simple oatmeal, or toast with butter and cinnamon. The third week, Harper woke to the smell of homemade chicken soup simmering on the stove. She came out rubbing her eyes, hair messy from sleep, and said, "Eleanor, did you make this?"
It smells like my childhood. I laughed softly. It's just soup, dear.
No, she insisted.
It feels like love.
Her words warmed me more than the steam rising from the pot. From that day forward, cooking became our shared ritual. I'd prepare meals, and Harper would sit at the counter sketching or chatting while peanuts circled our feet, hoping for a stray bite.
In the evenings, she'd introduce me to foods I'd never tried: quinoa salads, avocado toast, Thai curry. It's time you taste the world, she'd joke.
Before long, she gave me a key to the apartment. "Just in case you ever take Peanut for a walk or run errands," she said, trying to sound casual. But we both knew what it meant. It meant I belonged. One of the most unexpected joys was how quickly Peanut attached himself to me. He'd trot behind me wherever I went, nails clicking on the hardwood floor, tail wagging with reckless enthusiasm. When I knit him a tiny blue sweater, he wore it proudly, parading around the living room as if he knew he was loved. Harper burst out laughing when she saw him.
"Eleanor,
you made him look like a little professor." "Well," I said, patting Peanut's head, "every gentleman needs a warm wardrobe." We ended up taking Peanut on daily walks through the nearby park. The path wound through tall evergreen trees, their branches whispering in the breeze. Harper would point out different birds, and I'd tell her old stories, some from my childhood on a small farm in Missouri, others from my early years with my husband. She listened intently, as though every memory I shared was a treasure. It had been so long since anyone wanted to hear my stories. One afternoon, as we walked along a mossy trail, Harper linked her arm through mine. "I wish I'd had a mother like you," she murmured. A lump formed in my throat.
"I'm sure your mother loved you dearly."
"She did," Harper whispered. "But she was sick for so long. And after she passed, it felt like I lost not just a person but a whole piece of who I was." I squeezed her arm gently. Then maybe you and I were meant to find each other. She didn't speak. She just leaned her head on my shoulder for a moment in intimacy so pure it nearly brought me to tears. As weeks deepened into something that felt like permanence, Harper began leaving me little notes around the apartment. "Thank you for the tea, Mom E.
Your stew saved my whole bad day.
Peanut loves you the most. I'm jealous." The first time she called me Mom E, I had to sit down because my knees went weak. I traced the letters with my fingertips, trying to memorize their tenderness. No one had called me Mom, with sincere affection for years. Cassidy had stopped using the word long before she threw me out. Harper and I settled into an effortless routine. She worked from home during the mornings while I tidied the apartment or watered her plants. I learned the names of each one: snake plant, pothose, philodendron, spider plant, and even talked to them when I thought Harper wasn't listening. One day she caught me whispering to a droopy fern. Instead of laughing, she said, "No wonder they perk up so fast.
They love you."
Harper made me feel useful again. Purposeful. Seen. But it wasn't just domestic life that brought us closer. Harper took me on small adventures she insisted were necessary for my social enrichment. She brought me to the local art museum on free admission Thursdays, pushing me gently through crowds so I could stand in front of paintings that looked like secrets frozen in time. She took me to the farmer's market on Saturdays, letting me sniff fresh basil and pick the juiciest peaches. She even signed us up for a pottery class where I managed to make a lopsided but charming little vase. When I apologized for its crooked shape, Harper shook her head vehemently.
"It's beautiful because you made it."
I couldn't remember the last time someone admired something I created. At night, after dinner, we'd curl up on the couch, Peanut between us, snoring softly, and watch old movies. Harper loved classic comedies. I loved romantic dramas. We compromised by watching anything with both laughter and heartbreak. More often than not, Harper would rest her head against my shoulder, and I'd stroke her hair absent-mindedly like a mother comforting her child. It felt right. It felt natural. It felt like healing. One evening, as we washed dishes together, Harper broke the comfortable silence. "I know this might sound strange," she said quietly, "but having you here, it feels like having family again. The kind I got to choose." I dried my hands and placed them gently on her shoulders.
"You are family to me, Harper.
More than you know." She turned, eyes shimmering. "Then stay.
Stay as long as you want. Forever, if you like.
This home is as much yours as mine." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The idea of forever felt almost impossible after being discarded by the only family I thought I had. Yet here was a young woman, unrelated by blood, opening her heart and her home with no expectation of gain. My voice trembled when I finally answered, "I'd be honored." From that night on, I no longer felt like a visitor. I was part of a small, unconventional, beautiful family, just me, Harper, and Peanut, bound not by shared DNA but by shared kindness and belonging. I cooked, she worked, Peanut barked at delivery trucks, and life settled into a peaceful rhythm I never expected to find at this age. And though the wound Cassidy left in my heart hadn't fully healed, Harper's presence wrapped around it like a warm, steady hand, teaching me that love could come from the most unexpected places. Life with Harper had become a kind of quiet miracle, the kind you don't recognize as a miracle until something from the past comes crashing back to remind you how fragile peace can be. Even while I was learning to breathe again, far from the house that had once been my pride, chaos was brewing around Cassidy and Mason like a storm growing in the open ocean, slow, invisible at first, then violently unstoppable. I didn't know any details at the time, of course. I was too busy relearning how to feel human again. But months later, after everything unraveled, I pieced the story together through newspapers, legal documents, and things Cassidy later admitted with trembling remorse. It all began with Mason's hunger, his insatiable desire for money, status, and admiration. He had a talent for appearing successful without actually being successful. He dressed like a man who owned businesses. He spoke like a man who understood markets. He charmed like a man used to getting anything he wanted. And Cassidy, dazzled by his confidence and blinded by her own desire to rise above her humble upbringing, believed every polished word. Once he had access to my house and savings assets, he manipulated Cassidy into thinking she controlled his real plan took shape. He started persuading her to invest in a new development project he claimed to be working on near Bend, Oregon. He showed her brochures printed on thick glossy paper, floor plans of luxurious cabins, and fabricated email chains with investors who didn't exist. Cassidy fell for all of it. She poured tens of thousands into his fake project money that had once been my security for old age. And every time she transferred a new payment, Mason rewarded her with affection, compliments, and promises. He vowed that once the cabins were built and sold, they'd be millionaires. He swore they'd finally live the glamorous life he'd always described: vacations in Italy, designer furniture, dinners at Michelin-star restaurants.
Cassidy ate up every word.
Meanwhile, Mason was slowly draining everything dry. He used our property as collateral to take out loans. He forged Cassidy's signature on additional paperwork. Then, once enough money had been funneled into private accounts, he began distancing himself, offering cold excuses for late nights and out-of-town meetings, which were nothing more than drinking binges and affairs with other women he'd ensnared. The house I built, the home I scrubbed, painted, repaired for decades, became a party hub. Neighbors later told reporters that people came in and out at all hours, music thumping through the walls, strangers stumbling in the driveway, empty beer cans in the bushes. Furniture disappeared piece by piece, sold online for quick cash. Cassidy, swept into the whirlwind, partied alongside them, trying desperately to keep up with Mason's world. But the spiral couldn't last. One cold morning, months after I'd finally found warmth in Harper's apartment, Cassidy woke to silence.
Mason was gone.
No note. No text. No promise. Nothing. His belongings? Gone too. His bank accounts? Emptied. The company he claimed to run? Dissolved.
The development project?
Exposed as a complete fabrication. He'd left Cassidy with a house under foreclosure, loans she couldn't pay, and credit cards maxed out in her name. At first, Cassidy refused to believe it. She dialed his number over and over, crying so hard she could barely breathe. She waited for him to walk through the door, apologizing, explaining, reassuring. But he never returned. When she finally checked the last bank statement, she collapsed on the kitchen floor and screamed until her voice broke. Then came the phone calls from banks, from debt collectors, from lawyers representing other victims Mason had scammed. Cassidy wasn't just in financial ruin, she was implicated in fraud she didn't fully understand. She had unknowingly helped Mason commit crimes, and now she couldn't defend herself without admitting her own irresponsibility. The house was seized. Her friends, the ones she'd flaunted her new life in front of, disappeared as quickly as Mason had. No one wanted to get involved. She found out the hard way that people who enjoy your wealth rarely stay to witness your downfall. Eventually, she packed whatever valuables remained into a single suitcase and wandered the streets of downtown Portland, much like I once had, shivering on a rainy night with nowhere to sleep. She rented a cheap room in a rundown motel where the walls smelled of stale cigarettes, and each night she lay awake thinking about what she'd done to me. According to her later confession, my absence haunted her more than the debt collectors, the foreclosure, or the police investigators. She kept seeing my face on the night she slammed the door behind me, trembling hands, my soaked coat, my fragile frame crumbling under betrayal. She told me she'd dream about me sitting alone at the bus stop, waiting for help that never came. One night, unable to bear the guilt, she dug through her luggage and found something she'd almost forgotten: the photocopies I'd made before transferring the house to her. Months earlier, I'd quietly made duplicates of every important document and mailed them to an old friend, Mr. Turner, a retired lawyer who had always been kind to my family. At the time, I had no idea what made me take that precaution. Some whisper of intuition, perhaps.
Deep down, I must have sensed the danger.
Cassidy stared at those photocopies for hours, realizing that the very evidence she had once ignored might now be her only chance at escaping prisoner, at least proving she was manipulated. It took her 2 more days to gather the courage to call Mr.
Turner.
When he heard her name, he responded with a long, sad sigh.
Your mother trusted me with those copies, Cassidy.
I've been waiting to hear from someone I feared the worst. The next morning, Mr. Turner contacted state investigators and opened a full report on Mason. A warrant was issued.
Evidence poured in.
Victims came forward. Cassidy's financial ruin became a headline, and Mason became a hunted man. But while all of that was happening, while Cassidy was confronting the consequences of her greed, while police searched for Mason, while reporters dug into the story of a con man who ruined half a dozen lives, I was in Harper's little apartment folding laundry, unaware that the past was preparing to knock on my door again. I was mending one of Harper's cardigans when she cheerfully told me she'd gotten a new client, and we should celebrate by baking lemon cookies. Peanut was snoring beside me on the couch.
The sun streamed through the window in stripes, warming my face.
I had no idea that at that exact moment, states away, Mason was being arrested at the airport trying to leave the country, his wrists bound, his smirk finally gone. I had no idea Cassidy was crying in a motel room, asking herself whether she deserved forgiveness after destroying the one person who had always loved her without condition. I had no idea everything was about to collide: love, betrayal, justice, regret in ways I couldn't yet imagine. All I knew was that a peaceful chapter of my life was ending. And a painful, necessary reckoning was on its way. I never imagined my life would intersect with the law again, not at my age, not after all the years I'd spent believing my world was too small, too quiet, too ordinary to ever touch courtrooms and police reports. But life has a strange way of pulling you back to unfinished chapters, no matter how far you think you've walked away from them. It began one morning when I was reading a newspaper Harper brought home from the local cafe. I had fallen into the habit of reading slowly, savoring each article, reminding myself that the world was still larger than the 4 walls I now lived within. But on that particular day, my hands froze halfway down the front page. Portland man arrested in multi-state real estate fraud scheme. Under the headline was a picture of Mason, his charm gone, replaced with the hollow, defeated look of a man whose lies had finally run out of road.
My breath left me in a sharp gasp. Harper rushed over. Eleanor?
What's wrong? I pointed at the photo with trembling fingers. She leaned closer, eyes widening when she recognized the man who had once stood in my living room, smiling like a snake dressed in fine clothing. Harper took the newspaper gently from my hands and read aloud the details. Mason had been caught at Los Angeles International Airport attempting to board a flight under a false identity. He'd been linked to multiple fraud cases across Oregon, California, and Nevada. He had drained bank accounts, forged signatures, misled investors, and scammed vulnerable women, all using the same tactics. Including my daughter. Including me. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. What I felt was something heavier, deeper, and older than emotion, a kind of weary recognition that justice, slow as it may be, eventually catches up to even the most carefully hidden sins. And yet the article wasn't what truly shattered me. Toward the middle of the page, a smaller paragraph mentioned another name, local woman Cassidy Moore, initially believed to be a collaborator, now identified as one of the primary victims. I blinked. For a long moment, I could not reconcile the words with the image of my daughter standing coldly in the doorway, telling me to leave my own home. Victim. My Cassidia victim. Harper put an arm around me. Eleanor, do you want to talk to someone about this? Maybe the lawyer who was helping before. Her words nudged something inside me, a memory I'd buried but never let die, the photocopies I'd secretly made, the foresight I couldn't explain, the faith I'd placed in Mr. Turner, the retired lawyer who once lived across from our old house. Without thinking twice, I asked Harper for my old notebook, the one where I had written down the lawyer's phone number years ago. Harper found it tucked inside a drawer beside my bed, still marked with my fading handwriting.
When the call connected, Mr. Turner's familiar voice broke through the static. Eleanor? Is that really you?
Yes, I said, suddenly feeling like the frightened woman from months ago, the one standing outside her own home in the rain.
I saw the news. And Cassidy. Is she?
He paused, then exhaled slowly. She's struggling, Eleanor. Financially. Emotionally. Legally. But because you kept those copies, we have enough proof to clear her from the worst charges. The state is reconsidering her role. I felt my chest cave in a little. My Cassidy.
My foolish, lost girl. Can I see her?
I whispered. I think she needs you, the lawyer replied softly. More than anything. 2 days later, Mr. Turner arranged for Cassidy to meet me outside the Multnomah County Courthouse after she signed some documents for investigators. Harper insisted on driving Mesh, said she didn't want me facing anything alone ever again, and Peanuts sat in my lap the whole ride, his tiny heartbeat steady against my hands. The courthouse steps looked impossibly tall as we approached, each one echoing with memories I wasn't sure I was ready to resurrect. Harper squeezed my hand gently. I'll be right here, she whispered.
Take your time.
I nodded. Then I saw Cassidy. She stood near the bottom of the staircase, hugging herself against the wind, her once luxurious hair now tied in a messy ponytail. She looked thinner, older, worn down by guilt and sleepless nights. And when her eyes met mine, the world seemed to freeze. For a second, just one brief, excruciating second, she didn't move. Then her face crumpled.
Mom. Her voice cracked like glass.
I took 1 step toward her. She took 3 toward me. And before I knew it, she fell to her knees at my feet, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook violently. Mom, I'm so sorry, I don't know what I was thinking, I ruined everything, I hurt you, I betrayed you, and now I... Cassidy, I whispered, my knees buckling as I reached down to pull her up.
Stand up, baby. Please don't, kneel.
Not to me. But she kept crying, clinging to my coat like a child afraid she'd lose her mother forever. I don't deserve forgiveness, she choked out. I don't deserve anything. But I can't live another day without telling you I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her to my chest as she sobbed and sobbed, soaking the wool of my coat with grief she had held inside for months. And in that moment, something inside me broke open, not with pain, but with understanding. I realized she hadn't just lost money. She had lost herself. She had been manipulated, deceived, shaped by shame, fear, and pride until she became a stranger even to herself. I forgive you, I whispered into her hair.
I forgave you the moment you walked away. Because you, my daughter. And nothing will ever change that.
Cassidy shook her head desperately. I don't deserve it. Perhaps not, I said gently, but love isn't something we earn.
It is something we carry.
She cried even harder. Behind us, I heard Harper sniffle quietly. With the evidence Mr. Turner had collected, me photocopies, Cassidy's testimony, bank records, and Mason's arrest the state ruled that my home had been transferred under manipulation and fraudulent intent. Although the house had been foreclosed, it could legally be returned to me once the judicial process completed and Mason's stolen assets were recovered as much as possible. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't simple. But it was happening. For the first time in nearly a year, I allowed myself to imagine walking through that front door again.
The living room.
The kitchen. The lilies in the backyard if they had survived. But even as the possibility of reclaiming my house became real, my heart wasn't in the building itself. My heart was standing in front of me, trembling, ashamed, broken.
Cassidy held my hands tightly. Mom, I want to come home with you. I want to start over. I want to earn your trust back.
I stroked her cheek. Then let's rebuild together. Behind us, Harper stepped forward and wrapped her arms gently around both of us. You'll both have a home, she said softly. Wherever that may be. And for the first time since losing everything, I felt the fragile, precious beginning of a family forming, not one built by blood or obligation, but by forgiveness, compassion, and the courage to heal. The last stage of my journey back to myself wasn't loud or dramatic. It unfolded quietly, like the slow blooming of a winter flower determined to greet spring one last time. After everything, betrayal, homelessness, grief, reconciliation, the final chapter of my life arrived not with fireworks, but with gentle steps and open doors. Returning to my old house was the first step, though I'll admit, I was terrified the morning Harper drove Cassidy and me to the property. Legally, the house was being transferred back to me, but emotionally, I didn't know whether my heart could bear seeing it again. It had been stripped, foreclosed, left empty for months. A home abandoned by its own stories. As we pulled up to the familiar driveway, I inhaled sharply. The paint was peeling.
The yard was overgrown. The mailbox hung crooked.
But the bones of the place, the memories, the echoes of laughter and tears were still there, waiting like a faithful friend who never stopped hoping for my return. Cassidy reached for my hand.
Mom will fix it.
I promise. Harper nodded from the driver's seat.
And we'll do it together.
When I stepped inside, dust settled on the hardwood floors, and sunlight filtered through the windows exactly as it did the morning Daniel and I moved in so many years ago. I could almost hear his voice telling me to check the kitchen faucet one more time or asking whether we had enough nails for the porch railing. For a moment, grief and gratitude mixed in my chest until it felt hard to breathe. This house deserved better, I whispered. So did you, Harper said softly. Over the next few weeks, the three of us turned restoring the house into a full-time project, one that healed parts of us I didn't think could ever be repaired. Cassidy took on most of the cleaning. She scrubbed every surface as if she were scrubbing guilt from her own hands. She hauled out trash bags of debris abandoned by Mason and his party guests.
She painted walls.
She repaired shelves. She resealed windows. Each night, she'd say softly, "Mom, thank you for letting me try again." And I'd answer the same way every time.
You retrying now. That's enough.
Harper, with her artistic touch, transformed the old space into something unexpectedly warm. She repainted my bedroom in a soft honey cream I instantly fell in love with. She designed little framed prints to hang in the hallway, simple watercolor sketches of lilies, teacups, and Oregon forests. She patched the worn sofa with colorful fabric squares until it looked like a piece of folk art. Peanut supervised everything, of course, barking whenever we opened a new can of paint or dragging socks across the floor just to see if someone would chase him. We laughed often during those days. And sometimes, when Cassidy's eyes grew distant, I knew memories of Mason or her darker choices were haunting her. That was when Harper would slip an arm around her shoulders and say, "You're not that person anymore," in a tone so gentle it made me believe redemption wasn't just a concept, it was an action, a choice, a path walked one careful step at a time. Evenings became my favorite time. After hours of cleaning and repairing, we would gather on the back porch, still crooked, still weathered, still familiar, and sit with mugs of tea while the sun dipped behind the tall evergreen trees. Cassidy would rest her head on my shoulder like she used to as a little girl. Harper would stretch her legs across the old bench and let Peanut curl in her lap. In those moments, I often felt tears sting the corners of my eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of something deeper, relief, healing, unexpected joy. I once thought love was something that only flowed one way from parent to child. But Harper taught me love could flow laterally, upward, backward, and in circles. And Cassidy taught me love could falter, break, shatter, and still return stronger after its pieces were picked up. Not long after the house was fully restored, Harper made an announcement in the kitchen while washing dishes. "I've decided something," she said casually, though her voice trembled slightly.
"I want to live here. With you both. If that's all right."
Cassidy looked up from wiping the counter.
"Live here? With us?"
"Only if you want me to," Harper said quickly. "I know it's your home, Eleanor, but I've never felt as safe anywhere as I do with you two." Cassidy stared at her for a long moment, then put down her cloth and walked over to pull Harper into a hug.
"Of course I want you to. Your family."
Harper's eyes filled instantly.
"Mine did too."
And that night, when Harper carried her clothes into the spare room, and Peanut trotted around excitedly as if celebrating an important event, I felt something warm settle into my chest. I had gained another daughter. Not by birth, but by kindness. Family, I realized, was not about DNA. Family was about who stayed, who cared, who chose you, even when you felt unworthy of being chosen. Cassidy eventually found a new job, nothing glamorous, but honest work at a small insurance office downtown. She woke early, packed her lunch, and rode the bus each day. She was often quiet at breakfast, perhaps still wrestling with guilt, but her eyes held a softness that hadn't been there before. One evening, she came home excited. "Mom," she said breathlessly, "my supervisor told me I'm the most reliable person in the office."
"Can you believe that?"
"Yes," I replied without hesitation. "Because I've always known you could be." She bit her lip and looked down, ashamed but proud. "I want to be the kind of daughter you deserve." I cupped her cheek. "You already are."
Every day she healed a little more.
Every day she let go of another shadow of her past. Months passed. Then seasons. Our home became lively again. In spring, Harper and I planted lilies in the backyard, my favorite flowers, the ones Daniel used to bring home whenever he wanted to make me smile. Cassidy helped us kneel in the dirt, though she complained loudly about the worms. In summer, we hosted small barbecues for neighbors who welcomed me back with warmth and curiosity. Word about my story spread through the street, and instead of pity, people offered compassion and admiration. In fall, Harper set up an art studio in the sunroom, painting vibrant murals inspired by our unconventional family. Cassidy started taking evening classes in bookkeeping, determined to build a future with stable ground. In winter, we decorated the house together, stringing lights across the porch, baking cookies, wrapping gifts for families at the local shelter. Cassidy insisted we knit matching scarves for everyone, Peanut included. Harper tried hers on and nearly burst into tears. I watched them both with a heart that felt full to the brim. Sometimes, when I sit by the window with a warm cup of tea, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. Betrayal taught me about vulnerability. Homelessness taught me about humility. Harper taught me about unexpected kindness. Cassidy taught me about forgiveness. Together, they taught me that no matter how dark a chapter is, the next page is still unwritten and can still hold light. People often assume old age means the end of new beginnings. But I learned the opposite. Healing can happen at any age. Love can arrive at any age. Family can form at any age. Forgiveness can bloom at any age. The world may not always be fair, but goodness, quiet, stubborn, persistent goodness still exists. It exists in a stranger offering shelter. It exists in a daughter falling to her knees to ask forgiveness. It exists in the simple act of making dinner together in a kitchen that once felt abandoned. My story is no longer about loss. It's about revival. It's about grace. It's about a home rebuilt by 3 hearts and 1 mischievous little dog. And every evening, when the sun sets behind the trees and casts golden light across our dining table, I whisper a silent prayer of gratitude.
For Harper, who found me on a cold morning and brought me back to life.
For Cassidy, who returned to me with remorse and hope. For the home that welcomed us all. For the second chance none of us expected yet all of us needed. This, I've realized, is my greatest blessing. To be loved again and to love again after believing my story was over.